Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, nice to see you again. When you were here last, I talked with you about the fact that more than 130 officials in the Energy Department reported more than 2,700 trades of shares, bonds, and options in companies that ethics officers said was directly related to the agency's work. This is institutionalized corruption. And I asked you point blank, do you own any individual stock? And you told me, no. Let's just look at it. It was not a difficult question. Do you own individual stocks, Madam Secretary? You said no. In fact, you repeated it 3 times to me. No, no, no. Turns out that was false. You did own multiple individual stocks, and you neglected to report it to this committee for months afterwards. Why did you mislead this committee?
Oh, my goodness.
That was exactly my response. So why did
Senator,
you mislead this committee?
I believed that I had sold all individual stocks, and I was incorrect. So I came back.
You just don't
and
know your portfolio?
Pretty much.
It's a big one, I guess, huh?
No, it's extremely small.
Apparently not. Someone manages it for you?
So I came back as soon as I found out that, in fact, I had not sold all individuals.
Wait. No, that's not true either. Let's just look at the timeline. Let's not. I just remind you, you're under oath. Madam Secretary, you testified you didn't own any individual stocks. You didn't sell the stocks for a whole nother month. And after you sold the stocks, you waited another month before you informed this committee. Why did you mislead us, and what were you hiding? Why did you wait so long? Why did you hide this?
I did not hide it because I brought it forth to the committee when I realized that we had made a mistake.
Really? What explains the delay? Why did you wait for a full month to explain your actions to this committee, your false testimony?
That's less than a month, and I sent a letter explaining what had happened.
May the 15th to June the 9th. Are we
because I owned a Ford stock that was...
You misled this committee, and you wait. What were the stocks? What were the stocks that you owned?
It was a Ford stock that my husband had owned since he was very young, and I just was not aware of it.
And what were the others? You sold 6 stocks. What were the other 5?
I sold non-conflicting stocks.
What were they?
Honestly, I don't even know. I do know the Ford one because that was a conflict.
You don't.
That's why I raised this.
You're here before this committee a year later after actively misleading to us, after denying and delaying, and now you won't tell us. Was one of them Proterra?
No.
You sat on the board of directors at Proterra. You made millions, CNN reports, and stock options at Proterra. Then you promoted Proterra stock and Proterra products as Energy Secretary. Was that one of the stocks that you sold?
This is so... I mean, really.
Was that one of the stocks that you sold? Yes,
no,
really.
No.
You are presiding over institutionalized corruption in your Energy Department. You have violated the Stock Act 9 separate times. You have been referred by the Inspector General for violations of the Hatch Act. It is institutionalized corruption that you are now the face of. And here's what I'm trying to figure out. I just want to know who really runs the Energy Department. Is it you? Or is it the mega corporations whose stock that you own that you're making profits in?
Oh, my goodness.
Or maybe it's the foreign billionaires who fund your conferences. Let's try something else. Do you know the names of the foreign billionaires who fund the conferences you go to? Since you don't know the stocks, do you know the names of the foreign billionaires?
This is unbelievable to me.
Let me help you.
Mr. Chairman.
One of them is Hans-Georg Weiss, a Swiss billionaire who has used various dark money front groups.
I do not know what you are talking about.
Various dark money front groups to funnel foreign money into American politics. He has used the Burger Action Fund, $20 million, that then sent money to the Fund for a Better Future, that then sent money to the Climate Power Group that has funded conferences you've attended. Do you know who this is? Do you think it's a good idea to attend conferences funded by foreign billionaires?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
You don't know the stocks. You don't know the billionaires. You would take no responsibility. Meanwhile, your Energy Department, executives in your Energy Department are trading stocks in companies that they have direct oversight over, and you were too.
That is incorrect. Nobody
in
in the Department of Energy, and we have a strong ethics office, does not trade stocks in anything that they have oversight over.
That is simply not true, Madam Secretary.
Sir,
the Wall Street Journal has reported on this extensively.
Wall Street
Journal. If I may, Senator, if I may just ask the question. Is it possible that maybe we can continue this at a later time? But if you had any questions on the direct energy policies.
Mr. Chairman, this is directly relevant to institutionalized corruption in the Department of Energy that she oversees. You're, I think, about to say that the Wall Street Journal report's wrong.
The Wall Street Journal report did not say that people over whom they were in areas where they were directly overseeing had stocks. They did not. Our ethics office consults with all of our employees that need to be that have a reporting requirement about their stock holdings. They do not own stocks in areas that they have any influence over, nor do I.
Madam Secretary, all I have to say is this record is just deplorable. It is despicable. It is outrageous that hundreds of officers in the Energy Department are trading shares. It is outrageous that you misled us. It is outrageous that you are continuing to mislead us, and it is outrageous you're going to conferences and events funded by foreign billionaires using dark money to try to influence our politics. This has got to change, and frankly, you should go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Lee.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Madam Secretary, for coming in again. Appreciate you outlining the FY25 and hopefully smoother sailing for that process in the year to come than the last year. I want to go back to the conversation. That we've had at previous hearings, not just here but also at SST when you've come and spoke and outlined the vision. You mentioned in your opening remarks that we are the envy of the world right now, and I take issue with that. One, I don't want us to be necessarily the envy of the world. I want us to be secure. And that's what our voters want. That's what our constituents want. They want security. And one of the key cornerstones of our nation's security, national security, is the SPR, our nation's Strategic Petroleum Reserve. We are coming up now on the one-year anniversary where you came in front of us here at ENW and promised a plan to replenish the SPR. And what's concerning about where we are right now and what is not enviable or not frankly providing us security from an energy perspective is that you can see we are sitting here at record low SPR levels in our reserves that we haven't seen since 1983, which is when we were first starting to actually ramp up. So it has been a year since you committed to providing a plan. In this committee hearing, it was 6 months ago that you committed to bringing a plan. I have yet to see a plan to replenish the SPR. This is not a 401k chart. If you saw this and this was your 401k, you would be concerned and you would be acting on it. This is not a brokerage account for the federal treasury. This is, if you want to make a metaphor, it's an insurance policy for the United States. If we are not going to achieve 100% energy independence, we need to at least be in a position where we have a strong SPR, refill our coffers, and for rainy days be able to draw on that. You have sold off, millions of barrels, 150 million barrels at higher price points. In your last testimony, you said you were waiting for the price to come down below $72, and there's been about 4 months where the price of oil has been below $72 since you made that testimony, and we have not been tapping back into that market to replenish the reserve. So I'm not going to ask you what the plan is here because I don't think you're going to be articulated here, but I think you need to deliver to Congress a plan to replenish the SPR. We are dangerously close to not being not only energy independent, but not having a backup plan or a safety net when it comes to some global crisis around oil. In the span of the last year, oil has been as low as $67 and as high as $93. So I would appreciate if you would treat SPR more like an insurance policy that you are trying to just renew and make sure that this country has, and as a whole, it's comprehensive, it's going to protect us, rather than an E-Trade account where you're coming in and out of the markets in order to either make money or prevent the loss of money, or to try to change the price point of a barrel of oil. I'll leave it at that, but I would like to get you on the record to commit to coming back in front of us with the plan to buy back and refill the SPR.
We do have a plan, and the plan is that we were going to cancel the congressionally mandated sales, $140 million worth, 140 million barrels worth, that we were going to begin to repurchase, and we have. We've now repurchased about 30 million barrels back, and that we were going to accelerate exchanges. So by the end of this year, we will be back to essentially where we would have been had we not sold during the invasion of Ukraine and with Putin's
So you're saying
weaponization.
by the end of this year, we will be back up here?
To
at this,
where we would have been, because Congress sold or was going to sell 140 million
Right, but
barrels
we
to
did not.
solve budget.
Right.
Because part of our strategy was to come in and cancel those sales. So we
So if
specifically,
you
that
have
was part
not
of
to
our.
cut you off, but I'm getting short on time. If you have a plan and you're making commitments for the end of the year, what is the number in the SPR that we should expect to see in the end of the year?
It will be what it would have been had
What's-
we had
what's
not
that number?
sold. Which, so we're at 300 and, about 350 million barrels right now, 358, something like that. I have to look at what the exact number would
Okay,
be.
maybe
but-
staff can help you out while we talk to the other question I have around the nuclear energy, if that's okay, or
Mm-hmm.
we can get the answer for the record. We, in FY '24, made great strides in terms of the recycling of nuclear waste. We have seen the waste side of nuclear programs be the long pole in the tent in terms of viability, in terms of appetite, in terms of popularity with the American people. And we have put provisions in for interim storage of waste to help mitigate some of those concerns around the waste factors. What is preventing us from going quicker in terms of, rather than doing interim recycling, actually doing more permanent recycling? I'm seeing technologies out there where we actually can take some of the nuclear waste and recycle it with great efficiencies and great recycling percentages in a permanent fashion. And can also the permanent recycling of the fuel be included in the HALEU buildup conversations as well? Is this something that we can maybe get, 1 + 1 = 3 in those conversations? But if we are truly seeking the cleanest source of energy, which is nuclear power, small modular reactors, we have to be able to deal with and mitigate the waste side of this equation. And I feel like that technology is there. I just feel like the acquisition side and the government support for that technology is what's lagging. How do we get better in FY
Yeah,
'25?
you may be aware, we've, at our INL National Lab, our Idaho National Lab, they have a project where they're working on looking at the recycling and doing the research associated to make sure that we do it in a way that is responsible and clean and affordable. So we're very interested in this solution and hope to see some progress, some great progress. There's some private sector companies who are working there in a public-private partnership at INL to do that. So eager to do that. I'm not sure about using the HALEU money for that, because we have a desperate need to get that going too for the advanced reactors and the SMRs. But nonetheless, there is not an opposition to it. We're eager to see this happen.
Okay, thank you. Hey, you have time, you'll down.
I want to thank Mr. Garcia.
Secretary Granholm, demand for electricity is soaring. It's skyrocketing, in fact. This is happening for a number of reasons, including due to the emergence of AI, of data centers, semiconductor reshoring, clean tech manufacturing, and of course, electric vehicle use. A recent New York Times report addressed this issue and estimated that electricity demand from data centers alone, without taking into account any of those other factors, is going to triple by 2030, just in the next 6 years, using as much power as 40 million homes. Now, NERC has sounded the alarm, and NERC sounded that alarm by regarding this pending reliability crisis that's coming, due specifically to the lack of electricity supply. Demand is soaring, and it's soaring at the same time when the premature retirement of coal-fired power generation units is happening, and it's happening without replacement dispatchable generation capabilities. And so these factors have led to an over-reliance on sources like wind and solar, sources that, while clean, are entirely weather-dependent and can't give us a source of base load energy supply. Grid-scale battery technology is often touted as the answer to this, but of course grid-scale battery technology is nowhere close to being ready for deployment and use. So, Madam Secretary, do you dispute NERC's findings on this? Or is it true that we have a reliability crisis looming?
We certainly have a looming demand for energy crisis, and NERC, I think, put 91 gigawatts to that by 2033 that we would have to add to account for the increase in demand.
Okay. Now, in the meantime, I'd like to get a yes or a no answer out of this one, if you can. Yes or no, does the Biden administration support a transition to net zero?
Yes.
Okay. Now, look, the basic laws of supply and demand tell us that if we don't get our act together, we'll see rolling blackouts across the country. And yet you continue to advocate for a transition, even a rapid transition, to net zero. According to a report compiled by McKinsey & Company in 2022, quote, global spending on physical assets on the course to net zero would need to reach about $275 trillion by 2050, or $9.2 trillion per year on average. Now, this factor, of course, doesn't consider the economic ripple effects that would stem from more expensive energy and energy being made less reliable. And one also has to consider the impact of lost jobs related to those same factors. It's fair to say that a net zero transition is going to require enormous sacrifice by American families, with low-income households being hit the hardest. This is deeply concerning to every American. It ought to be concerning to Americans of every background, of every political stripe. But more than anything, this isn't so much about left versus right, Democrat versus Republican, as it is rich versus poor. Rich folks can handle significant increases in the price of energy. Poor folks can't, especially when they find that increases in the price of energy spill over into literally everything they buy, into everything that they do. And when you're living at the margins like that, you're not going to be able to handle that. So, Madam Secretary, if the United States, consistent with your ambitions, with your plans, with the ambitions of the Biden administration, if it completely transitions over to get to net zero, exactly how many degrees will global temperatures decrease as a result of moving to net zero?
Well, we want to keep global temperatures from rising more than 1.5 to 2 degrees. The net zero is by 2050, so there is time to be able to get there. If we see temperatures rising greater than that, of course, the costs for poor people and for people overall because of these extreme weather events will be catastrophic.
Okay, but let's get back to my question. If we get to net zero, when we get to net zero, should we get there at some point? If we get there, what impact will that have on global temperatures?
As I say, the striving to net zero is to prevent the temperatures from rising more than 1.5 to 2 degrees.
Yeah, it's still not the answer to the question. The question is, what impact is that going to have? We've just talked about the fact that it's going to cost $275 trillion to get there. And we've talked about the fact that it's going to cost the global economy, $9 or $10 trillion a year in order to get there. So what does that buy us? What does that do? Now, you're saying, yes, we're trying to not have temperatures increase more than the defined amount that you just described. But what impact does this have? What does it do for global temperatures if we get to net zero?
Perhaps I'm not understanding your question. I think I have answered that. And the whole point is to prevent these extreme and accelerating weather events. We have had year after year of record heat. We've had year after year of increased extreme weather events just in this country.
Look, I understand the Biden administration's affinity for blaming everything, including bad weather, on Republicans and on climate change, which they always associate together. And I fail to understand how you can definitively say that a complete transition to net zero is necessary when you don't even know the impact that it would have on global temperatures. You can't tell me sitting here today what it's going to do. You tell me what you fear might happen if we don't do that, You tell me that you think temperatures will increase less if we do this than if we don't. But I don't get this, especially when, if what you're talking about is, you know, a large number, it would seem fanciful and not backed up. If it's a smaller number, it could be dismissed as a rounding error. And meanwhile, you're talking about completely changing the global economy. And given the way the United States tends to honor its legal obligations and its commitments more than other countries do, we can rest assured that it's going to cost the United States a lot more money than it is going to in a lot of places, meaning poor and middle-class Americans will suffer by far more than anyone and everyone else. I find this completely unacceptable. This is reverse Robin Hood. It's talking about stealing from the rich, stealing from the poor to give to the rich. Nobody supports that. And we can't endure it. America's poor and middle class certainly shouldn't have to shoulder this burden.
Senator Hoeven.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary, for being here today.
Thank you, Senator. And we have Senator Cassidy.
Madam Secretary, I actually thoroughly accept that we need to decrease emissions, but I'm afraid that the administration is so ideologically focused that we're doing otherwise. Tell me, in the analysis of the natural gas export, are we looking at the fact that because we are exporting less natural gas, that other countries are using more coal, and the greenhouse gas footprint of Germany burning more coal is obviously much worse than if they were burning clean U.S. natural gas? Is that end user having to substitute coal for natural gas part of the life cycle analysis?
First, just to clarify, we are not stopping the export of natural gas. So
yes, but you're stopping the permitting, which means it's creating uncertainty, which means that there are contracts that are going elsewhere, if you will.
We have authorized 48 billion cubic feet of natural gas. That is a massive amount. All of that is still going forward if people can get final investment decisions. Currently exporting 14 billion cubic feet, another 12 billion cubic feet that are under construction. None of that is stopped. None of it.
Yes, but let's not be disingenuous. The fact that there is a pause means that this regulatory pause driven by an administration which sometimes does not look at end results means that investment decisions are being changed.
Well,
but my point
we have
being,
spoken with
if I may go to the point.
Yeah.
Is that life cycle analysis looking at the fact that countries may end up using coal instead of natural gas or import natural gas from countries which don't have our same stringent environmental standards?
Yes, fuel switching is definitely part of the analysis.
So it will show, just to be clear, that China will be using more coal and the impact on global greenhouse gas emissions as opposed to substituting U.S. natural gas. Or Germany, or whomever.
Fuel switching by any country or by countries will be part of the life cycle analysis.
I have to admit, the fact that that is so obviously and so transparently a major contributor to greenhouse gas emissions that we still need to do the study, again, indicates to me that there's another reason to do the study. But that's an editorial comment. We had testimony here about a year ago, and I forget quite from where, but it was around, I think, Oklahoma, Kansas, someplace like that. And they were talking about how the regulations requiring them to go to renewables was endangering their capacity to meet surges, or and you just talk about the rickety old grid. The fact that we have to bring electrons from the panhandle of Texas all the way to Atlanta obviously makes the grid more important. Whereas if somebody's locally producing, the local grid is more easily maintained, doesn't have to be as high wattage, et cetera. And I say that because a statement was just made that the administration is focused on reducing energy costs. Can we hold up that chart? This is actually what has happened since the administration has taken over. This is what the cost of energy has done. This is not holding down energy cost. There is a term used in Europe, energy poverty. I remember reading an article in the New York Times, ideological New York Times, about a family in western Massachusetts, in which the church had to pay the utility bills. Now, I say that because I think there has to be a little bit of table setting. A lot of these things which theoretically are going to lower cost, in reality have increased costs for the average American family. Pipeline permitting becoming more difficult, for example, means that it's more difficult to get cheaper burning natural gas, and therefore people's utility bills are going up. I think Senator King and Manchin have discussed that in the past. Any comments on all that?
Yes. Number one, There is no doubt that we are all focused on reducing costs for people, and energy, of course, being a big component of that. Natural gas prices.
By the way, that chart would suggest that it's not being very successful. It's
Well,
truly a
that
focus.
chart also starts in January 2021 in the middle of the pandemic. So let's be clear about what it actually looks like out of pandemic. Nonetheless, it is important to recognize that the price, for example, of natural gas is at very low prices right now. The price of solar, very low. What's causing the increase in energy prices? One contributing factor is the investments in the grid that are necessary, this old grid that gets rate-based among ratepayers. And it's one of the reasons why it's so important for us all in leadership to take a look at how we invest in the national electric grid so that we are not forcing ratepayers to bear that burden.
Now, may I say that also one thing contributing to the high cost is the inability to permit new natural gas lines. And if you can't get adequate amounts of natural gas to a utility, they're going to have to pay more for whatever source they get it from, and that's a major contributor. We can speak of power lines, but local generation is often natural gas, and that has been inhibited. That pipeline development has been inhibited by this administration's policies.
Well, that's not under my jurisdiction, so I don't have data on that, but I know that this administration is interested in lowering costs for people, which is why they've increased the amount of money for LIHEAP, for weatherization, increased the ability for people to buy electric vehicles at the dealership by reducing those costs, increased the ability for people to do insulation in their homes so that they can reduce the cost. All of these things, all driving toward reducing cost of energy. The cost of natural gas is not high. It is the cost of the infrastructure associated with the energy grid that is expensive.
Yes, I yield. Thank you.
Senator Heinrich.
Thank you, Chairman. Welcome, Secretary.
And Senator Brasso.
Thanks so much, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Granholm, 2023, U.S. produced record amount crude oil, natural gas. Good thing or a bad thing for the country?
Good thing.
Great. Largest exporter of liquefied natural gas in the world. Good thing or bad thing?
Good thing.
Our allies more or less secure as a result of what we've been able to do.
It's a good thing.
So world demand for liquefied natural gas is expected to increase significantly between now and 2040. Energy needs are up. I mean, they're talking about in the next 5 years, U.S. energy demand may be adding a new California, just in terms of the amount of energy that's going to be needed. The New York Times had a front-page story about that. So are America's interests better served if the world buys LNG from us or from Qatar?
We think that our LNG is produced in a cleaner fashion, and that's why one of the reasons the demand for our LNG is up to 14 billion cubic feet per day that we are exporting currently, including the 48 billion that have been authorized
Same with Russia?
not yet exported.
Same with Russia? Better using ours than Russian?
Of course.
Better using ours than Iran. Great. So the Inspector General has included a written statement in the President's budget, and we have a letter to that effect. And the Inspector General explains that the President's budget will substantially inhibit her from performing the duties of her office. She said, we won't be fully funded in the office in terms of the things that they need with just the amount of money that you talked about that's going out. Is there a reason you're not willing to fund the Office of Inspector General in the budget?
The Office of Inspector General has gotten the second largest percentage increase in their budget, a 73% increase in her budget to be able to correspond with the increased amount of funding that is going out the door. We support the Inspector General. We meet with her all the time, and she is getting significant increase in funding under the 25 budget.
Even with the President's budget request, the Inspector General is going to still be short about $170 million to deal with the amount of money that the Department of Energy has gotten over this period of time in the legislation that you have outlined this morning.
We support the Inspector General, which is why we've asked for such a large increase in her budget.
Jigger Shaw, the head of the department's loan office, recently stated, I don't think anyone is really accusing us, except rhetorically, of pushing money out the door quickly. The Inspector General said, there is no precedent in the department for this level and pace of financing. And she said the department's funds are already moving quickly and internal controls are, quote, untested. So who's right? Mr. Shaw, who says nope, the Inspector General, who said going out really fast, and the internal controls are still untested?
We are testing those internal controls thanks to the advice that she has been providing on how to create them. The reason why it seems fast is because literally no loans were set forth in the previous administration. Currently, there are 18 loans that have either closed or provided a conditional commitment, and 205 in the pipeline, which tells you that the Loan Programs Office is doing a terrific job of being open for business. But that said, it does take time to get a loan through, and that's because of the internal controls that LPO is using.
Well, as we've had a previous hearing in this, I could tell you Mr. Shaw is open for business, and I think it's distressing and a terrible situation going on with him right now. Different topic. Last month, you testified that it is possible the administration could impose its own ban on imports of Russian uranium. You also said the legislation solidifies the ban more concretely than if just the department has done it. So your preference is for Congress to enact a ban on imports of Russian uranium. Is that correct?
That would be my preference, yes.
So, and I agree with you. And so I think so do the Americans' nuclear fuel suppliers. Another topic, so along with Russian uranium, if the administration does impose its own ban on Russian uranium imports, will you commit to adhere to the same limits and conditions and terms as found in the legislation that the House has already, that's passed the House?
We would abide whatever Congress passes, of course.
Okay, and will you commit to promptly notify this committee if the administration does issue any waivers on the ban?
Of course.
Okay. Additionally, in February, Deputy Secretary Turk defended the department's decision to stop approving LNG exports. He cited a forecast by the International Energy Agency showing a decline in the world's demand for natural gas. But the department's own Energy Information Administration forecasts that the world's demand for natural gas is going to grow significantly. Why did he ignore the department's own forecast for the world demands for natural gas? And do you think it's appropriate to cherry-pick data to justify different policies of the administration, like the ban on natural gas exports?
I can only assume that what he was suggesting is that there's a range of projections regarding the world's use of natural gas, which is one of the reasons why we are doing our own modeling through the National Energy Technology Lab and the Pacific Northwest National Lab while we update our analysis.
Oh, well, thank you. And I agree with that assessment because, unfortunately, he chose one that was not the department modeling, and I thought the department modeling was a better response of what actually the needs are going to be. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Secretary, the immediate response to the administration's proposed guidance on the 45V tax credit on hydrogen is clear. If implemented,
Please.
Secretary Granholm, last September, President Biden said, quote, "The only existential threat humanity faces, even things more frightening than a nuclear war, is global warming." Do you agree?
I strongly believe that climate change is an existential threat to the planet.
Okay, so that's not exactly my question. President Biden said the only existential threat humanity faces, even things more frightening than a nuclear war, is global warming. Do you believe that nuclear war is an existential threat?
Of course.
Okay, so that's not what the president said. What is more frightening about global warming than nuclear war?
I'm not in a position to compare the two, but I can say that climate change is having a dastardly impact across the globe, particularly in areas that are subject to heat. We've had record heat years now, consecutively, year after year, which has
But, Ms. Secretary,
devastating
do you
impact.
agree? It sounds like you don't agree with the president that global warming is more frightening than nuclear war?
I am not in a position to characterize what the president was saying. I'm just saying that it is
Okay.
an existential threat.
So as the Secretary of Energy, your most important job is our nation's stockpile of nuclear weapons, which is the backbone of our entire national defense. Every military operations by the Department of Defense is underwritten by that strategic deterrent. But last year, you testified that ensuring we have enough lithium for electric vehicle batteries is more urgent than ensuring the nation's stockpile for that nuclear weapons are adequate. Do you still believe that our lithium supply, as important as that is, and I grant you, is more important than the nation's nuclear weapons stockpile?
I don't recall saying that.
Okay. Well, do you believe that?
I believe that the lithium supply is important, but the nation's nuclear stockpile is very important as well.
Is it the most important thing you do in your job?
I don't rank things in my job.
Not at all? So making sure that the annual picnic comes off well is as important as the nation's nuclear stockpile?
That I would rank lower, yes.
All right. Ms. Ruby, can you discuss what you're doing to recruit agents to the Office of Secure Transportation? Do you have enough agents to accomplish your current nuclear weapons transportation requirements?
Yeah, thank you for this question, Senator. This is a very important function that we have that a lot of people don't understand, that we do transport nuclear weapons that are still in the custody of the Department of Energy or when they're coming back to the custody of the Department of Energy. And these agents are amazing. They have a hard job, and they do it very well, and they do it, they've done it safely and securely for a long period of time. And of course, we have a great training facility at Fort Chaffee. We are always trying to recruit people. We have enough. We do our job, but we have to work hard to recruit and as importantly, train the agents as we get them. So it's a constant concern for us, but we're paying attention to it. Thank you.
These are highly specialized roles and equipment, right? You can't just throw a nuclear warhead in the back of your F-150 and drive it between military bases.
Not in the United States of America. We have very specialized trucks, vehicles, convoys that transport materials that these agents are responsible for. They go through rigorous testing, both physically and mentally, to be capable of doing these jobs. They're a hugely important part of our workforce.
Okay. I believe you have 370 positions authorized. You know how many you currently have filled?
I don't off the top of my head.
My understanding is it's only about 280. And with the upcoming modernization plans, I have concerns about the office's ability to fulfill its mission and the strain it's going to put on those agents. So I'd encourage you and the department to look at what you can do to recruit more folks into that office. I see that the clock has disappeared, so I guess I have an indefinite amount of time to ask as many questions as I want, but I'll yield back to the chairman.
Thank you very much. Chairman, thank you. Good to have you here, Secretary.
Nice to see you.
It's been 2.5 months since President Biden paused LNG exports in order to study their impacts. We are no closer to knowing when this pause will be lifted or if it ever will be lifted. If DOE follows the facts and looks at previously published reports, this study will come back the same as all the other previous studies. U.S. LNG exports builds jobs, it strengthens the economy, it reduces global emissions. But I fear, and I'm not alone in this fear, I just met with the ambassador from Croatia, that they're just shocked around why the United States would pause LNG exports in the midst of war on the continent of Europe, where Putin has weaponized LNG, weaponized natural gas. But I look no further than the White House website, where the first quote in their press release lauds, and let me quote, "This administration's historic efforts to meet the global commitment to phase out fossil fuels." Is LNG a fossil fuel?
Yes, it is.
This is followed by the second quote, which features hashtag #StopLNG. So, Secretary Granholm, if this pause is truly about updating studies, then why do the majority of the quotes in the President's own press release say stop LNG and phase out fossil fuels?
I haven't seen those, but I can tell you that this is
I encourage you, if you haven't seen it, we'll make sure you get it. This is right on the White House press release. You work for the President of the United States.
I have not seen that press release or that quote, but I can tell you that it is a pause to update the study because so much has happened since the last time a study was done. we were only exporting 4 BCF of LNG at that time, and now we are exporting 14, with another 12 BCF under construction and 48 total authorized.
Well, as you know,
This pause doesn't affect any of that.
well, you know, we've been exporting LNG since 2016, and DOE has done numerous studies since then, including one that showed that LNG exports to Europe have the lowest life cycle emissions. So what exactly is DOE looking for that hasn't already been published?
Well, first of all, as Senator King noted, the fact that we would be potentially exporting up to 48 billion cubic feet, when the last study it was just 4, and we use natural gas here at home, we produce about 100 billion cubic feet of natural gas at home. That would mean we would be exporting, if in fact it was all built, and I'm not saying it's all going to be built, half of our production. What does that do for prices at home?
Let me ask this.
Volumes of
When
these-
will the study be completed?
Around the end of the year.
Around the end of the year.
Mm-hmm.
So what information could DOE find during the study that would cause you to deny all future export applications?
We're not in this to deny all future
But the
export.
website, I'd love to have you go see the White House own press release that says, phase out fossil fuels, because I don't believe what you're saying on prima facie. I think there is a ideology here, as clearly articulated in the White House own release. It says, phase out fossil fuels, #stop LNG. That doesn't seem to be talking about pricing. That seems to be a radical ideology now to go to
Well, I can
zero
tell you-
fossil fuels.
I can tell you what our instructions have been to the national labs who are doing this study is follow the science and the data. And that's all it is. It's look at what the science and the data show, both on prices at home, what the global demand will be in light of all of these countries saying that they're making different pledges, what the demand will be on the part of our allies so that we can ensure that they are well supplied.
As we're watching Russia continue to destroy Ukraine, when our allies are pleading with us for more U.S. LNG, I was
Our
over.
allies are getting their LNG. Can I
was over-
just be super clear about that?
But no, Madam Secretary, with all due respect, the chilling message you send by pausing LNG permits
It is
is
a
being
pause.
heard around the world. I get
It
that.
is a pause for a study. You don't need to hype it out beyond what it is. It is a pause to get data.
So why couldn't you do the study in parallel here instead of putting a pause on permits? Because time is the essence. We're talking about a couple of permits. The message that's sent, I will just tell you,
Well,
maybe you're talking to different allies than I'm talking to, but
I'm
they are
sending a
wondering
different
what's going
message
on.
clearly than others have been sending. The message I'm sending is all of your LNG that you have under long-term contract is going to be all right because you are already exporting and it's already been authorized. We are taking several months to do a study to determine what the impacts are of additional LNG authorizations, both globally and at home.
I respectfully ask you to stop this highly political pause.
It is a
and get
scientific
back
pause,
to the
sir.
mission of the Department of Energy.
It is a scientific pause.
I don't,
We're gathering the data.
Yeah, well, I think you are yielding to the radical elements of the left who want to see, go back to the White House press that says, stop fossil fuels, #stop LNG. That doesn't sound like a pause. That doesn't sound like cost. That sounds like an ideology that wants to keep LNG from ever being shipped anytime.
Well,
that's a radical ideology. It's out of step with the American people. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And we have Senator Hirono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary, for being here today. One of the things that, as you know very well from visiting the Energy and Environmental Research Center, is that, you know, we're working very hard to develop these new technologies so that we can keep our base load energy in place, whether that's our coal-fired electric plants, but also the work that we do in oil and gas. You know, we have the best stewardship in the nation, in the world. Our country has the best stewardship in the world, and it's because we are leading the way in all these technologies, which obviously you saw at the EERC, and DOE needs to help us with that. One of them that we talked to you about is the Plains CO2 Reduction Partnership, PCOR. So we work on that with the EERC at the University of North Dakota. Senator Barrasso works on it in Wyoming with the University of Wyoming. Senator Murkowski in Alaska, the University of Alaska at Fairbanks, as well as our esteemed chairman, Senator Manchin, works with these regional partnerships in West Virginia. So they're very important. They really cover the country. And so we, through the appropriations process, secured funding for those partnerships. There's 4 of them that pretty much cover the whole country. And we directed that Congress move ahead with a multi-year funding to competitively select, these partnerships to go ahead and provide, again, this work on how we can safely sequester CO2. And as you know, that's done both for sequestration as well as enhanced oil recovery. So my question is, we need to get going on that. And in the past, there's been disagreement between Congress in terms of funding these things and then the DOE coming in and how they've approached it. And so my question to you is, will you commit to promptly issue a funding opportunity announcement for the RCSP program that's consistent, this is the important part, consistent with the language that we included for 2024? Because we have been doing this for a number of years. These folks, these universities have done a good job across the country, and then DOE came in and tried to, and did change how it's being handled. So we put language in this year to make sure that we move forward with this funding and that it's done as we've done it in the past, which has been very successful.
So the answer is yes. Short answer, I was pleased to see Liberty Carbon Management Hub at the University of North Dakota received from the previous funding opportunity announcement. We are using that same language to go into this next funding opportunity announcement.
Okay, and it's very important. Another project that you're aware of and that we've talked about is Dakota Gasification Company, which takes lignite coal, converts it to natural gas. 50% of the CO2 stream goes for EOR, enhanced oil recovery. And now they're capturing another 35%, which takes it up to 85% for geologic storage. Same thing, though, EERC, University of North Dakota, they measure. So you've got an independent entity measuring to make sure that the CO2 is captured, is put down whole, it's sequestered, and that it's safe for the long term. And, we've put a lot of programs in place in North Dakota. We're one of 2 states in the country that can do it right now, North Dakota and Wyoming. Same thing, you're working with them to fund that monitoring project. The first round, I think, was $1.4 million, but now there's additional follow-on funding as this project is ramped up. Again, largest carbon capture project in the country. Again, want to know, will you commit to promptly approving the necessary funding that you participate in with them as a partner in what I think is an incredible, incredible project that's really leading the way forward?
Of course.
Okay. So both of those, I think, incredibly important. The last thing I want to bring up, and I know you've been asked about it, I haven't been here for the whole hearing, but is I was about a year ago in both South Korea and Taiwan. They need LNG from us. We don't want them to be dependent on Russia or somebody else. So again, in terms of this moratorium on siting LNG facilities, it's just paramount that we move forward. And it's not just getting it in place, it's the market signals that we send. You yourself just mentioned the cost of LNG is low now. So we need the facilities to provide it to customers. What can you do to help advance this process so that we get back to permitting LNG facilities?
Yeah, I mean, as we've said, this update process, which is done with our national labs, will be completed around the end of the year, and the data will show what the data shows. But the important part is that it takes into account what our allies need, what we expect the global demand will be, what the impacts on the ground here are in terms of jobs and community, and what the life cycle issue is with respect to LNG. And so all of those, and the cost, of course, very importantly, the cost at home of exporting a large amount of LNG for our own manufacturers, for example, our own consumers of natural gas. So all of that is happening right now, and this will soon be in the rearview mirror.
Yeah, it is really important that we get that squared away, not only for our own national security, but also working with our allies.
But just to remember that everybody who's currently exporting, this does not affect. Everybody who's under construction, this does not affect. Everybody who's authorized, this does not affect.
Yeah, well, we both understand the issue, and your attention to it is very important, and so I thank you for that.
Great.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator.
Chairman and Madam Secretary, thanks again for being with us today. I want to focus first on nuclear as a source of generation, and nuclear energy is widely supported in this committee and in Congress. As stated, our chair's Prohibiting Russian Uranium Imports Act passed on unanimous consent last night in the Senate, which is good news. Not only does this legislation put an end to Russian uranium imports, but it also unlocks $2.72 billion to ramp up domestic uranium fuel production that through my bill, the Nuclear Fuel Security Act, gives DOE the ability to incentivize a market for advanced fuels. DOE will also have the ability to strengthen the fuel infrastructure of the existing fleet. Madam Secretary, do you believe that DOE understands how the buying and selling of fuels and fuel services in the private market can distort that market when it starts implementing the program?
I think we are aware of market dynamics, and we have a team that is focused on doing this well. Happy to work with you on whatever Congress needs to do, but I think we've got the tools necessary to make sure that we build up this uranium strategy in this country so that we are secure.
Well, that's going to be my follow-up, because it'd be very harmful if DOE takes actions that can make matters worse. So, will you report to this committee about your plans for implementing the Nuclear Fuel Security Act? Thank you. Just some headlines have been in the paper recently, in the last couple of days, that the Dominion chief executive expects its peak load to increase at least 5% each year for the next 15 years, and they recognize they're going to need more natural gas in order to keep the lights on. Another article in the Wall Street Journal on April the 30th, Duke Energy reported to regulators that they will need 3 new gas-fired power plants in the Carolinas. Otherwise, they will need to keep the coal plants open. Wall Street Journal article and other papers have been reporting this. Just this week, the International Energy Agency, that U.S. data centers' electricity consumption could rise from 4% in 2022 to 6% in 2026. AI could add 8%. Last December, someone from EPA, when I asked the question as to how much more energy they thought they'd have to have if the president's idea of going all electric by 2035, thought it would be another 4.5%. I think they were too low. But the question really is, do you believe that this country needs to have more energy or less energy in production?
More energy.
Thank you. Another question that had come up, especially when we were talking with PJM, in 2014, as you might remember, we had a huge polar vortex that went across the Midwest. My district, with a massive amount of manufacturing jobs, we had a situation where, the question was, we were going to go into blackouts or brownouts in the state of Ohio. Fortunately, we're in a situation that all power stations across, in our 2 nuclear power stations in Ohio, everyone was at maximum production. We did not have a brownout or a blackout. Not long after that situation occurred, I'd asked PJM, I said, if we had the same situation today, could we sustain what we did at that point? Because again, with the steel production, float glass, everything that you can't shut down. And they said it wouldn't be a problem. But as the years progressed, we started seeing a little bit change in opinion, because the PJM on their website talks about that there's a need for more power production. When I asked them the same question recently, what would happen if we had the same situation of that polar vortex in 2014? They said, well, we probably could sustain what we have, but when we go into the future, the likelihood we would not be able to do it. So I guess the question really comes down to, are you concerned about all the retiring generation stations we have in the United States today? Because knowing how long it takes to get generation up, especially that base load capacity that we have to have, is so important. But are you concerned about those generation plants?
Yeah, thanks for the question. It's a really important question. I know that we can get 20 to 100 gigawatts on the existing system just by deploying some of these technologies that we have not availed ourselves of at this moment that are much faster than having to wait for the building of a new power plant, like reconductoring wires, like virtual power plants, like making sure that we have grid-enhancing technologies. So that's number one. Number two, because of the great work of Congress, that we have now the incentives to put clean power onto the grid, we saw last year 40 gigawatts of additional power added to the nation's electric grid. Another 65 gigawatts are planned to be added this year. So we need to do both. We need to add new power, and baseload power is important, which is why energy storage, again, which was something that didn't exist back during the polar vortex days, is available now through utility-scale grid storage. All of those tools will help to make sure the lights stay on. I will say, though, that the polar vortex is an example of what we're going to continue to get hit with because of climate change, honestly. The number of extreme weather events across the country. Last year, over $1 billion events were 28. It has every single year continued to climb, as we've seen. The events are becoming more frequent and more extreme, and we have an old grid. So there is no doubt that we need to continue to invest in the grid itself, in addition to making sure the generation is there.
Mr. Chair, my time's expired, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Thank you, Madam Secretary, for your testimony. We'll now move into the question and answer portion of today's hearing, and I'll begin recognizing myself for 5 minutes for questions. There's no question the United States is staring down an electric reliability crisis. FERC commissioners, grid operators, state commissioners, and reliability experts have all testified in this committee about the vulnerable state of our grid and the growing likelihood of blackouts. One FERC commissioner went so far as to say, quote, there will be, in time, a catastrophic reliability event. Secretary Granholm, as Secretary of Energy, do you share these authorities' concerns about the state of our grid reliability?
I definitely share the concern that the grid is not up to what it needs to be in order to allow us to continue to grow. We know that demand for energy is increasing. We know that the grid is old, and the poles and the wires and the transformers, they need to be replaced. It was built in the 50s and 60s in many places. And so we need to continue to invest in upgrading the grid, hardening the grid, and expanding the grid.
Thank you. And to do that, we're going to need to mine more in this country. It's another agency, but critical mining for copper and other components necessary. The North American Electric Reliability Corporation, or NERC, and the grid operators have warned about policies to transition Americans away from fossil fuels, prematurely retiring coal and natural gas power plants, and canceling pipelines. You're responsible for coordinating national energy policy. Does the administration recognize that premature retirement of electric generation threatens this reliability of our grid?
We want to make sure that we manage this transition in a way that ensures the power is on and we continue to move to clean energy. So it is critical that we continue to use the tools at our disposal. We just issued a grid liftoff report, which describes some of the tools that we have not had in the past to be able to ensure we can add capacity to our grid and harden it. For example, making sure that we can reconductor to put twice the power on existing power lines, or that we use more grid-enhancing technologies to smartly move power on the grid, or to use new opportunities, tools like virtual power plants to be able to access additional power. In addition to the great opportunity that Congress gave us in the Inflation Reduction Act to incentivize additional generation of electricity. All of that is happening. We have managed increases in demand in the past, and we can manage them going forward.
Reliability means 24/7 baseload power generation that you don't get from a lot of renewables. Let me shift gears. The lack of pipeline capacity to energy-constrained regions is also a grid reliability concern. The CEO of ISO New England testified to this very committee that New England is in desperate need of more pipeline capacity, even with growth in renewables. My home state of South Carolina is facing these same issues. We had the ACP get canceled. MVP had tremendous delays. We finally were able to get that done. Secretary Granholm, you yourself have stated that pipelines are the safest way to transport fuels, whether it's gas or liquids.
I agree with you. Pipelines are critical for maintaining energy reliability, especially to balance the intermittency of renewables. Do you agree that we need to build more pipelines in this country?
I think in some places, we will need to build new pipelines, and I think we definitely need to build new pipelines for hydrogen, for the movement of CO2, as well as traditional energy.
Thank you. Would you rather utilize natural gas from the Marcellus or the Permian Basin or import LNG from a foreign country?
I don't think we need to import any natural gas. We have enough supply here.
Amen to that. That's why we need pipelines in New England, because they're importing LNG. I want to thank you for your efforts on nuclear energy. Nuclear energy is a critical source of reliable generation, and so happy that the chairwoman's bill got passed by the Senate yesterday. Look forward to the president signing that. Last month, this committee held a hearing on spent nuclear fuel policy. One issue that came out of this hearing was the loss of capacity and credibility of DOE's spent fuel program after it dismantled its office dedicated spent fuel management about 14 years ago. The law requires DOE to have a dedicated office to manage spent fuel and nuclear waste, which will help credibly address the federal government's obligations and strengthen the public's confidence. Will you look into resurrecting the Office of Civilian Radioactive Waste Management and to fulfill DOE's statutory duty under the Nuclear Policy Waste Policy Act?
Well, I do think that our Office of Nuclear Energy and our Office of Environmental Management both do aspects of that. We are interested in spent fuel use and wise storage of spent fuel as well, and both of those are being addressed in those offices.
Thank you. I take that as a no on the resurrection, but allowing the agency to continue its path. I believe it's important to establish a comprehensive fuel management plan, and that would be a good first step. I'm finished with my questions, so I'll now recognize the ranking member.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, I represent one of the most economically stressed congressional districts in the country. Average household income is just barely over $50,000. That's household income, not individual. My people are hurting, and they're hurting because in large measure, high energy costs. And it's not just gasoline. A lot of times when people hear that, they think it's the gas at the pump. It's also electricity. The utilities are constantly asking for rate increases, and I'm getting constant complaints about it. And the reason that they're asking for those rate increases is in part because of they're switching at the behest of DOE and EPA. They're switching to more expensive fuels. They're switching away from coal and natural gas to wind and solar. And at the same time, the ratepayers are still having to pay, those same people who are out there struggling and working hard, they're having to pay for facilities that were built 20 years ago with a 50-year life expectancy, or 30 years ago with a 50-year life expectancy, and those facilities are still costing. The stranded assets of the utilities still have to be paid for, and the ratepayers are paying it, but they don't have the money to. I know it's not just DOE requirements, I know it's EPA too, so I don't want to be unfair, but if you were sitting in my shoes, what would you tell the people of the 9th Congressional District of Virginia when they call you up and tell you they can't afford to pay their electric bill at their house anymore?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I mean, I totally sympathize with this, especially with folks who have, who have lower incomes and trying to figure out how they're going to make ends meet, and the utility bill keeps going up. You were out of the room, but I was describing one of the main reasons for this is because we have a terribly old grid, and these utilities are wanting to rate base the price of upgrading the transmission lines and the grid and the distribution lines and the distribution transformers, et cetera. The price of the renewable energy is actually cheaper. I mean, solar is the cheapest form of energy right now, cheaper than coal, cheaper than natural gas. Natural gas is very low, but it tells you that natural gas is super low right now, the price of natural gas, but the price of energy bills have not come down, even though we rely heavily on natural gas for 40% of our energy mix. So it tells you that there's something else is going on.
But you would agree it's not just the grid, it's having to buy new sources of energy, and to get that new source of energy to the grid is different than the old baseload power plants that use natural gas or coal because they have to be more dispersed around the countryside. And as a result of that, that's part, not the only reason, but part of the reason for the grid increase. And then the fact that they're still paying for that fossil fuel power electric generation that was built 20 years ago or 30 years ago, but still has 20, 30 years of life expectancy. And because of regulations from the federal government, not just DOE, again, I don't want to say it's all of yours, but because of that, that's a big chunk of why the prices are going up. Even if solar is cheaper over a long, and I dispute that or don't agree to that today, but we'll talk about that another time. But even if I accept that principle, they're having to invest, the utility companies are having to invest in all new facilities when they have perfectly good facilities that the ratepayers are already paying for, correct?
So natural gas is not affected, existing natural gas plants is not affected by the EPA rule. So that EPA rule does not touch natural gas plants. On coal plants, it requires, in 5 years, technology of carbon capture to be installed so they are not polluting. Many of the coal plants that have shut down because they just are not finding it financially viable for them. And they've chosen to close down because it is not something, people aren't demanding coal.
It's not financially viable because of government regulations. Now, let me just say this, because it's something that that I think about. Not everywhere in my district, but there's large parts of my district where people have coal in their backyards. We even had a member of this committee one time who owned a house with a coal mine in the basement. When the prices get high enough, they're going to find a way to heat their home. It's going to be wood most likely in most of my district, or it's going to be coal. But one of the problems that I think that sometimes the administration has a hard time understanding is people are going to figure out a way to heat their homes, hopefully safely, but not always the case. And when you don't have any other choice, when you don't have the money to pay that big bill, that might be fine for the rich folks, but that's not fine for the people I represent. I yield back.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Secretary Granholm, do you believe that the world can achieve carbon neutrality by 2050 without nuclear energy playing a substantial role?
I do not.
Okay. I agree with you. I want to go back to my thesis that I hope I articulated it reasonably well. But we don't have an overarching plan or analysis for achieving CO2. In my opinion, we're just throwing money at it. Let's suppose Professor Lundberg is right, $27 trillion a year. That's worldwide to achieve carbon neutrality and maintain it through 2100. Let's assume America's share, we produce 15% of CO2 emissions. That makes our share about $4 trillion a year. That's, I don't know, 8 to 10% of our GDP. Doesn't sound like much when you talk about it that way, but it's still $4 trillion a year, every year. That's money we can't spend on health care or feeding people, housing. What happens if we start spending $4 trillion a year, each year, for every year through just 2050? And China doesn't do its part, or Russia doesn't do its part, or India doesn't do its part, or Vietnam or Thailand. How much is our money going to reduce world temperatures, or the increase in world temperatures? The answer is zero, isn't it?
No, I don't think it's zero, but I do know that this is why we have global
But how much is it?
This is why we have all 190 countries signed on to get to net zero by 2050.
I know they've signed on, and excuse me for
and
interrupting.
countries are moving in that direction, sir.
But they're not doing, I'm asking you, and I hope they do it, okay? If it turns out that the scientists are right. I'm not saying they are or they aren't. It's just that the whole topic has become so politicized. But we never talk about what happens if they don't and what is the likelihood that they will. And let me ask you again, if we spend $4 trillion a year, every year, until 2050, to achieve carbon neutrality in the United States, and President Putin and President Xi and Prime Minister Modi say, I don't think so. I think I'm going to spend that on domestic needs in my countries. How much are we going to reduce world temperatures?
With respect, I'm not going to buy into the hypothetical because they have said, I don't know about Putin, but the president of China and Prime Minister Modi have all made commitments to move in this direction and are spending money to move in this direction. But the better question is, or a parallel question would be, what happens if we don't?
Well, I'm interested in my question, though. Well, you're good, but I don't want you to change the subject. Have you ever known President Xi to lie?
Well, I am telling you what is in the plan and what we have seen in terms of their spending. They have spent about $400 billion a year so far. That was, I think, in 2023 on renewable energy. So
what about Russia?
Spending.
What about Russia?
Spending. Russia,
you honestly believe that
I don't have the information on Russia. They're not very transparent. But all of these countries have signed on to the goal. And my point is, if we don't, sir, if we don't, we will be spending globally $38 trillion a year to clean up after the extreme weather events that are happening because of climate change.
But you use that figure, but I've seen no basis for it. Professor,
I can send you that.
Professor Lomberg says it's much less than that. But here's my point. Do we just start spending the $4 trillion a year and spend it blindly every year like clockwork? Or at what point, if China's not pulling its load, or Russia, or Vietnam, or Sub-Saharan Africa, at what point do we say, what model do we have in place to say, whoa, wait a minute, we're wasting our money because they're not spending theirs?
I believe that the United States and its leadership in this world, as well as our allies, are not going to throw in the towel. That this is too important in terms of our world, in terms of climate change going into the future and the devastating impact it is having right now, much less in 2050.
I'm out of time, but do you trust, look me in the eye, do you trust Vladimir Putin?
No, I don't trust him.
Or President Xi Jinping to do anything other than what is in their best political interest and the power that they achieve in the world. Do you really believe that?
And in China's interest, it is in their interest to move down this path because they are experiencing extreme heat waves and death as a result of climate change. And this is why they're spending what they are. And this is why they want to dominate these clean energy technologies, because they see an economic advantage for them to be leading in this. So, no, I don't trust what they say, but we will verify.
But you're willing, well, I've gone over. I'm sorry, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Secretary. Thank you, Madam Secretary. I'll try to come back, or
Thank
not.
you. Senator Shaheen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary, for being here. I just came from questioning Undersecretary Sue, so I guess I'm all primed for secretaries. And,
all right.
I'm hoping your answers will be fuller and more complete than hers were, so I'm not cursing the project. Under President Biden, the Department of Energy has completely shifted its mission regarding energy security, reliability, and affordability. The department's spending priorities, which sway heavily towards renewables and the administration's overall anti-fossil policies, will increase costs for consumers and crowd out opportunity for expanding nuclear and advanced fueled fossil technologies necessary for American manufacturing resurgence. President Biden says he wants everything made in America, but his environmental and energy policies say opposite. As the chair noted earlier, manufacturing isn't the only thing impacted by these policies. Retail rates for our constituents are also going up significantly, surpassing the rate of inflation. I just have to look at the Wall Street Journal article that found that electricity prices here increased by 30% since 2021. 50% higher than the overall inflation rate. That was the case. Families are paying more, and what are they getting out of it? And so the department has set aside billions for interstate transmission projects that serve the renewable goals of differing states. However, those projects have faced serious delays or have been canceled. By one developer's own admission, the project was not viable. Transmission build-out already necessitates increases in retail rates that everyday Americans have to pay. Madam Secretary, how do you justify those costs as you push build-out based on political goals and not reliability or economics? Beyond that, why should taxpayers pay for these projects that are not viable on their own?
All right. So first, nice to see you. We need to make sure that we have a reliable grid.
Agreed.
Right now, the PUCs across the country are putting onto ratepayers the cost of making that grid reliable, shoring it up. It was built in the 50s and 60s. It is old, and a lot of these utilities go to the PUCs and rate base the upgrades to the grids. One of the things that we had suggested previously, this administration, was to get to have that be part of an infrastructure project, a national infrastructure project that we take on as a nation to have a reliable grid through, for example, investment tax credits for building up the grid. We don't have that, and so that's why these prices are going up. The president, the administration is obsessed about lowering prices, and that's why the focus has been on what can we do to, in the scheme of things,
We
to
saw
lower
lowering
costs.
prices take place before this administration took
Yes.
office, and they were going down significantly
Because
with
of
greater
COVID.
independence.
You can't complain, you can't compare anything that happens today with what happened 4 years ago, because we were in the middle of a pandemic and everything dropped through the floor. The legitimate comparison is before that. But no doubt, before that, there was still investment in grid, but not as much that is necessary. We need a bigger investment in our national grid, and we need to have it paid for.
Well, that's where promoting the opportunity of the free market, of our private sectors, to do the jobs that they're capable of doing without the excessive regulation and, I would say, respectfully, interference from the federal government that just isn't working.
Well, that's why tax credits are a great thing, because they are government-enabled but private sector-led, and we operate in partnership.
And
with the
taxpayer
private
supported.
sector. Yes, of course.
Taxpayer funded.
The infrastructure that we need, the roads we drive on, the
Let me jump
transmission
in one
wires
other thing.
are paid for by the taxpayers.
The EV mandate that we have, jumping to that area, and the grid security, which you've mentioned, based on the success of the IRA and IIJA, as well as the dependence on consumer restricting solutions like managed charging, forgive me if I'm skeptical of those two entities. The White House also estimated that these laws would help build 500,000 EV charging stations by 2030. In the last 2 years, they built 7. How are we going to complete that? And what does that mean to the citizen?
So, number one, we are at 171,000 charging stations, largely driven by the private sector at the moment, and the goal is to get to 500,000. What the electric vehicle initiative was doing, the NEVI, National Electric Vehicle, was to give funding to the states to be able to fill in the gaps where the private sector has not gone. And in order to do that, that means that a charging station is going somewhere where it has not been before, where there may not be electricity, because they're filling in a gap. And so
Seven gaps.
well,
the 500,000.
but here's the thing, is that it takes 18 months on average to get the electricity, the planning, and the permitting for one charging station. So now all of them have gotten their money. I have got 35 states that have released solicitations for the installation of
Let's reduce all that time.
21 states that
I'm
have
well
announced
over, and I
awards.
will yield
It's all
back.
at the states, and, continue to press on all of your governors and your offices to make those happen quickly.
Gentleman's time's expired. Now we'll go to Ms.
Mr. Presley.
Thank you for joining us, Madam Secretary. Always a pleasure. The climate crisis is real. The planet isn't warming, as many experts have cited. The planet is burning. It is on fire. And the Department of Energy is essential to mitigating its harms while ensuring a healthy environment with clean air for all. policymakers at all levels of government have a responsibility to do everything we can to transition from dirty fossil fuels. That's why I was really pleased to partner with the City of Cambridge in my district, the Massachusetts 7th, to deliver $1 million in federal funding to create publicly available and community accessible electric vehicle charging stations. Madam Secretary, while some of my colleagues across the aisle have spread disinformation about EVs, as co-founder and co-chair of the Future of Transportation Caucus, I would like to set the record straight. Investing in electric vehicles is good for the environment, it's good for people's pocketbooks, it's good for public health, and it is good for job creation. Secretary Granholm, regarding that last piece in particular, can you speak to how the Office of Energy Jobs is helping folks take advantage of opportunities from the proliferation of electric vehicles?
Yes, we are seeing, as you've noted, all of these job sites opening up factories to create batteries for electric vehicles, or electric vehicles are assembling the batteries into the vehicles. And it's a new thing. And so the question is, how do you create a workforce that is capable of taking on this whole new sector of the economy? So the Office of Energy Jobs has been working with our friends in labor to be able to create, and with our community colleges, to be able to create a workforce curriculum, for example, for batteries for electric vehicles that can be adopted in any part of the nation, but can have certified workers to be able to do that. Every time you have a new factory open up, there's an opportunity for an economic cluster, and that cluster has to include the workforce component of it, and that's what the Energy Jobs Office is doing.
Thank you. I know certainly in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, we're encouraged by the developments in this space that we're already seeing, and certainly look forward to our continued partnership with your agency. Mr. Chair, I want to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a Boston Globe article titled, "What EV Slowdown? Electric transition is still booming in Massachusetts."
Without objection, so ordered.
Now I want to discuss another priority in the Commonwealth, which should come as no surprise to you, and that is wind energy. Earlier this year, the Department of Energy announced a multi-million-dollar center of excellence to accelerate the domestic wind energy industry based in Massachusetts, AERO, which stands for Academic Center for Reliability and Resilience of Offshore Wind, is led by the University of Massachusetts Amherst, with partners from across the nation, from Northeastern University in my district to Morgan State and HBCU in Maryland to the University of Puerto Rico. AERO will help propel us toward a 100% clean electricity grid, a goal outlined in the Green New Deal and a key part of the Biden-Harris administration's climate agenda. I'm excited to see this work take off because there are significant benefits in harnessing wind as a renewable energy source, and one of those benefits is jobs, well-paid, union-backed jobs. Secretary Granholm, how can Congress help support workforce development in the domestic offshore wind energy industry to fill those roles, from manufacturers to electricians and beyond?
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I mean, I think the biggest thing that Congress can do, Congress has done in terms of providing the incentives for these wind developers, for the ability for us to build the wind turbines in the United States instead of importing them from, so especially offshore wind from Europe. And so there's been a huge cluster of activity around just that, creating the workforce for those jobs. Once the jobs are coming, you want to train people for jobs that are there rather than the hypothetical job that might come. And so that's exactly what is happening all across the country.
Thank you. And one more in these last 30 seconds or so. I just want to build upon the question posed by my good colleague there, Congresswoman Brown from Ohio. How is the Department of Energy ensuring that marginalized communities benefit from job opportunities in the green economy? How do we ensure that the green economy is inclusive to Black, brown, low-income folks, especially those who have been hardest hit by this climate crisis, representing frontline communities?
Yeah, two things. I mean, Congress has done its part by providing additional incentives, tax credits, like an additional kicker if a development goes into a disadvantaged community, which is great, and that's doing a lot of the work. DOE is doing our part by requiring these community benefit agreements for the grants that we give out, requiring that those private sector entities who get a grant from us have to have an agreement with the community about how people will be employed and trained and how the community will benefit from their presence.
Thank you. I yield back.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Palmer from Alabama.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary,
In response to a question,
called The Next Generation Empowering America's Nuclear Energy. I submitted several questions to be answered at a later date. The NRC and FERC have both responded, but the DOE has not. Do you have a commitment? Are you going to commit to responding to my questions over the next 30 days?
I'm not sure about over the next 30 days, but definitely we will commit to responding to your questions. I know it's in a review process, but we're also happy to sit and with you in person and brief too on answers, but it is in a review process right now.
Madam Secretary, this was January. It is now May. Yep. You got 4 or 5 people sitting behind you. What other review processes do you need to answer just one member's
believe it or not,
questions
it's
from
beyond
Congress?
them. It's
Oh, I know it's beyond them. Let's move on. Let's talk spent nuclear fuel.
Yeah.
We have roughly 88 metric tons of spent nuclear fuel. It's for the people watching this hearing, it's basically takes up the size of one Olympic pool. Many countries, including France, one of our great friends and partners around the globe, they have invested in recycling spent nuclear fuel now. And the amount of spent nuclear fuel we have in the United States, we could power the United States for roughly 400 years. Is the DOE actually going through and exploring recycling spent nuclear fuel rods instead of the constant conversation and dogma about nuclear waste that is present in the United States? Do you think recycling spent rods is actually in the nation's interest?
I do, and we are looking at that, and I'm excited that you're interested in it as well, because I think that's a program that we should continue to fund.
All right, so when you say interested, what does that mean?
It means we've got labs that are working on the research related to it. I know that we've funded a couple of companies as well that are also doing that. We think that it is an important aspect of how we deal with nuclear waste.
Okay. All right, good. I want to follow up with you on that because we should be using all that stuff at our disposal. I'm glad that my colleague from Tennessee, Mr. Burchett, spent time with you talking about modular reactors and microreactors, so I'm not going to go down that line. I think it's important for the American people to understand that the future of baseload power in the United States, from everything from AI, quantum, digital assets, to our current needs from an energy apparatus, we are going to need massive amounts of baseload power. And wouldn't you agree that solar panels and wind turbines are not going to be able to fulfill that need?
Well, if you add batteries, they become more baseload-like, but certainly I'm not saying that one has to be at the expense of another. I think both can happen.
Secretary, I think you would agree that battery technology really has not changed that much since the Duracell.
Oh,
and
it has.
Sure,
it really has.
I think
we can have
you would
a
agree
conversation
with that.
about that. It
All
definitely
right.
has changed.
I want to go back to a colleague with the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Higgins, because he went down a line of questioning with you about the administration's pause on liquid natural gas. For decades, the Department of Energy's position on liquefied natural gas has been that it is safe, it is clean, and it is actually in the nation's interest for it to be procured and then also used in the United States and obviously transported and traded around the globe. In short, what has changed at the Department of Energy?
Yeah, the only thing that has changed is that the volumes that have increased so much, we need to take another look. It's not that the ones that have been approved are not in the nation's interest. They were and they are, and they're going to continue to operate. It's the question of how much more new expansion and what will be the impact in the United States. So if we export our natural gas, what does that do for, if we export, we produce right now about 100 BCF of natural gas, a little bit more. If we export the amount that's authorized currently, which is 48 BCF, that's about half. What does that do to prices at home? That's a question.
Let me ask you this question. Do you believe that just in basic supply and demand, that more supply on the market actually decreases prices? And wouldn't a decreased price actually be to the benefit of the public interest?
For sure it would be.
So then what are we talking about, Secretary?
So this is what we have to look at. So one of the questions that we are looking at, we also have to take a look at what it does for global supply, our allies, all of that.
And again, this is a good conversation, but you know, congressional hearings, our time's limited.
Yes, sir.
Considering what is happening right now in Ukraine, isn't it in the public's interest here in the United States to increase exports of liquefied natural gas to cut down the ability of the Russian regime to actually earn money in the open market?
We are exporting natural gas. We are not stopping that.
Hold on, Secretary, hold on a minute. I'm gonna reclaim my time because I got 18 seconds now. We're not in a debate. This is a hearing, but you have put a pause. and you're saying it's in the public interest, but you can't really identify what the public interest is because it's in the public's interest for prices to go down. It is in the American public interest to try to limit the ability of the Russian regime to earn more money on the open market with their resources. Wouldn't you agree with that?
The pause does not affect that. Everything is still
The
going
price
forward.
does affect their ability to earn money to wage war, Madam Secretary.
Sir,
You know that just like I do.
It does not right now. This pause is for a brief period of time to update a study. It doesn't
How long is the
affect
pause?
any of that. It will be finished.
I would argue, Madam Secretary, that the pause that you are doing is against the law because you have not finalized your parameters and what you're looking at. And any events of that being finalized, you do need to execute the permits that are waiting. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes Mr. Kassar from Texas.
And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes Mr. Perry from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary, appreciate you being here answering questions for us. I've got a letter here from the PJM regarding the Brandon Shores Power Facility in Anne Arundel County. And I'm just going to read from it. According to the PJM interconnection spokesman, the PJM region and the state of Maryland are facing future reliability challenges as a result of the announced retirement of Brandon Shores units. Specifically, PJM analysis showed that the deactivation of the Brandon Shores unit would cause severe voltage drop and thermal violations across 7 PJM zones, which would lead to widespread reliability risk in Baltimore and the immediate surrounding area. So let me make that plain for everybody. Brandon Shores, owned by Talon Energy, has entered into an agreement with the Sierra Club to not produce power, And so the PJM, which operates in multiple states and schedules the power from various facilities, is asking that that agreement be held in abeyance until a reliable source can be built. But they're not going to do that. The only thing that's going to save Baltimore from blacking out, from going without power, right, is an emergency designation from the Secretary and the Department of Energy. There's not enough time, even if we wanted to build it, and we don't. And let me be clear here. The alternative is that Pennsylvania, where I live, provides the power, and our land is taken by eminent domain to send the power to Baltimore, who has a perfectly functioning power plant right now in Anne Arundel County. But because of the agreement, they're going to shut it down. So my two questions to start with for this are, is the Department of Energy in support of these type of agreements between the Sierra Club like this, between the Sierra Club and Talon Energy to shut down plants? Number one. And number two, are you committed to the emergency declaration that's going to be required when the plant shuts down for over 1 million customers to have power and live in the 21st century?
Well, I'm not familiar with that agreement. I'd have to take a look at it. We certainly want to make sure that power stays on and that we add additional power to make sure that there's enough for people. So that's why we're working so hard to ensure that we are deploying
clean energy
solutions.
I have the letter. I assure you it is real, and it is dated December 5th of 2023. So it's not new. It's not a new concept. This is coming. And so assuming, let's just do it this way. I don't want to assume on your behalf, but assuming this is valid, you can see the logo up there. We'll have it entered into the record. I'll stake my reputation on what the PJM has offered. Assuming that is correct, are you willing to commit to an emergency declaration so that the lights and the power can stay on for 1 million customers? It's going to require the Department of Energy.
Yeah, we're always willing to exercise emergency authority if lights are going out.
Do you think it's fair that the people of Pennsylvania have to watch their land chewed up to send power to Baltimore when they've got a perfectly well-operating facility? Is that fair that we do that? And the facility can be transitioned. It's coal now. I know everybody hates coal. I do not, but a lot of people do. I'm sure there are scrubbers on the plant, and the requirements just keep on increasing such that the plant can no longer remain viable economically under the conditions that the federal government has set. But is it fair that Pennsylvania then has to provide the power and the transmission across its land for Baltimore?
I think there are other solutions, though. I think that
I think there are too, and I hope we can pursue them.
But
I hope we can pursue them. I appreciate that. Madam Secretary. In the little bit of time I have left, Representative Biggs talked about the loss of money to the car companies. Ford is delaying introduction of its all-new electric SUV. It lost $130,000 on every EV. The division will lose $5.5 billion in 2024. Tesla saw an 8.5% decline in deliveries. GM lost $1.7 billion in Q4 of 2023. This is all happening at taxpayer expense. The increase in EV usage and sales is wholly by the federal government, right? It's not because the private sector is actually declining. And so with that, while you're here, as a current cabinet secretary, would you commit to saying on the record that you will not support a bailout of the car companies once we bankrupt them, once these policies, that's where we're headed, ma'am. We've already done this before. It cost us $81 billion in 2014. What will you commit to today regarding the car companies that are going to go bankrupt based on these requirements from the federal government?
Car companies do not say they are going bankrupt.
When they do.
They are excited about the trajectory of electric vehicle sales into the future.
They don't seem excited to me from...
They are continuing with their plans. They may have slowed them a little, but they are continuing with their plans to
because
build
they're
electric
forced
vehicles
to by the federal government.
Because there's a 30% increase year over year in demand for electric vehicles.
Only by the federal government, ma'am.
By
Madam
individuals
Secretary.
out there who want to save money as they drive.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And gentleman's time's expired. Before I recognize Ms. Bush, did you have something, gentlemen, you were wanting to enter into the record?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to enter this order from the PJM to must produce power to Brandon Shores and Allen Energy.
Without objection to
Thank you,
order.
Chair.
Now, Chair recognizes Ms. Bush from Missouri.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes Mr. Waltz from Florida.
Madam Secretary, thank you for coming in. In preparation for the hearing, I watched your appearance on The View, and after one of the hosts was kind of condescending and insulting the intelligence of the 74 million people that voted for President Trump, you talked about, because they were talking about how the prices of everything are so high. You talked about, well, in response, what the American people need to do is take advantage of tax credits to weatherize their homes and take advantage of credits to buy EVs. I found it kind of astounding because I didn't hear anything in your response, and I want to give you a chance today to talk about how the American people need to deal with this. Energy and federal government spending are the two greatest drivers of inflation. And it is eating Americans alive. They can't afford rent. They can't afford groceries. They can't afford electricity, right there in your wheelhouse. They can't afford gas. So how are we, with the energy prices so high, with spending so high on a lot of these credits, by the way, EVs only make up 1% of the cars on the road, how are we driving down prices to help the American people?
Yeah. We are really obsessed with reducing prices for people too, and totally get it.
But Madam Secretary, it's not working.
But, well,
the inflation rate's up almost 20%.
Inflation
Gasoline's up 55%.
Inflation is coming down. When you say from what point is gasoline up 55%? I don't know what your measurement is from the start of the administration.
Gas prices are high. I mean, you look at where they were in the mid-twos to now the mid-threes.
Yeah, the mid-twos were in the middle of a pandemic. All those prices that you're talking about, they're in the middle of a pandemic when prices are through the floor. It's not a normal time. However, let me say, we are obsessed with making sure we bring down prices for people.
Madam Secretary, I appreciate, I only get 5 minutes on behalf of the people I represent. I appreciate that you're obsessed with it. What you're doing isn't working. These prices are still unacceptably high.
Okay. This is why the President has focused on every way possible to help reduce prices for people. This means whether it is on prescription drugs or whether it is weatherizing your home to reduce your electricity bill, whether it's helping people to be able to get an electric car so they don't have to pay gasoline prices, whether it is reducing student loans, every pocket of way the President is trying to reduce costs for
Except
people.
that he's doing that by printing money and throwing federal dollars at the problem. You got one group of Americans paying the student loans for another group. You got one group of Americans paying through their taxes EVs for another group, which, by the way, are not environmentally sound in terms of the materials that go in them. And I would encourage you to read the book Red Cobalt that talks about the 40,000 children that work in the cobalt mines of Congo, some as young as 6. But let's just stick with prices for a moment. Clearly hasn't worked here. But let's talk about abroad. The intelligence community has confirmed for me that, and a number of analysts have confirmed, I mean, obviously Russia fuels its economy on oil and gas. Iran fuels its economy on oil and gas. At about $55 a barrel, Russia can no longer fuel its war machine. It actually goes into kind of economic survival mode. So wouldn't it make sense to flood the global market with cleaner? You admitted in prior testimony American gas is cleaner than what came through Nord Stream 2, correct?
Correct, it's cleaner.
So why wouldn't we flood the world with cleaner, cheaper American oil and gas, drive down the prices? Now you've not only solved what's going on with the Iranian-supported terrorists in the Middle East, you put Putin on his back foot as well in terms of the war in Ukraine. You've now solved 2 global problems and the inflation problem here at home, but instead the climate agenda is counter to all of that. We're restricting our supply, and then we're allowing Iran to pump to China. We're allowing Venezuela to pump. Russia is pumping more than it ever has through India and China, for that matter, into Europe. How does this make sense?
This is so curious to me, because we are the #1 producer of oil and gas. We are the #1 exporter.
But we could be pumping so much more if we weren't tapping the brakes in Anwar, we weren't putting a ban.
Oil dominance. We are doing more than the previous administration, significantly.
How much more could we be doing, Madam Secretary? How much more could we be doing? Because the price of oil is still hovering around 80. Demand is still out there. That's why the price of oil and gas are still so high.
Correct.
That's why everybody's still buying Russian oil and Iranian oil.
But it is not this administration that is hampering the production of oil and gas. I mean, you can make that face, but we are #1 in the world. We are at record levels.
Okay, we're at 13. Could we be at 15 million a day? Could we be at 16? Could we be at 17?
Nobody's
just final question, Mr. Chairman. I just had lunch with the Speaker of the Parliament of Lithuania. She was in near panic mode. Lithuania, right on the front line, probably next after Ukraine with Russia. She said, Congressman, we buy 85% of our gas through the terminals in Louisiana and in Texas. These are bought on very long-term contracts. We're having to think 10 years out. She said, I don't know what to do with the ban.
There is not a ban.
She said, I'm going to have to start looking elsewhere.
We have spoken with
our allies believe it's a ban.
No, they don't. We have spoken with them. They do not believe it's a ban. It is not a ban. It is.
I encourage her to come talk to you.
Update an analysis of what's in the public interest. Nothing is stopping from what is currently being exported.
Time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's time's expired. I'll now recognize myself for 5 minutes. And Madam Secretary, let me go back and correct something.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Madam Secretary, and Madam Secretary for being here. I want to apologize in advance. I've got a couple of other committees going, so I'm going to be in and out. I'd like to hear you talk today about a couple of things. First, Madam Secretary, I'm very disappointed in the administration's decision to place a moratorium on LNG permits. I don't see how that is going to further the goal of climate change. I do see how that is going to hurt America's energy independence, but equally important, it's going to hurt our friends in Europe. It's going to help our enemies, like Qatar. It looks political to me, and I'm hoping you'll be able to address that. I'd also like to talk today about whether the administration would consider, so far it hasn't, it's considered it, but it hasn't done it, advancing petroleum pit production. We've done better, but it's still not enough. I'm disappointed that the administration hasn't emphasized nuclear energy funding. I don't understand how we're going to achieve carbon neutrality without advanced small modular nuclear reactors. And the administration doesn't seem to want to talk too much about the benefits. Of course, there are costs as well, but the benefits of nuclear energy. It seems to have worked out well in countries like France, which sees its energy future, including a big role for nuclear energy. So those are the kinds of things that I'm hoping we can talk about today. But I want to end my remarks, Secretary Granholm, with a more general thought. I consider you to be one of the most intelligent and accomplished appointees by President Biden. That doesn't mean I agree with all of the positions that you have taken. I don't know to what extent you have taken those positions because you believe them or because you have been directed to take them by the White House. But I also feel like in our debate over energy transition, we're missing a major piece of the puzzle. And that's an explanation to the American people about what we're doing, why we're doing it, the costs of doing it, and the benefits, and the trade-offs. And I think you and your department should take on that responsibility. Let me try to be more specific. There's a gentleman by the name of Dr. Bjorn Lomborg. I'm not saying that he has all the answers, but he is a visiting professor at Stanford. He's head of a think tank in Europe called the Copenhagen Consensus. He is basically a climate change economist. And in peer-reviewed studies, he predicts, for example, that in order for us to be carbon neutral, and not just the United States and the world, by 2050, and to maintain it through 2100, it will cost about 1% of the world's, not America's, but the world's GDP. Well, that doesn't sound like much until you reduce it to raw dollars. That's $27 trillion a year. That's the cost. He raises the question of whether we should spend that $27 trillion or take a portion of it and instead use it to combat the effects of climate change, which he estimates we could do successfully worldwide for $1 trillion a year. Now, you may not agree with his numbers or his analysis, but a cost-benefit analysis is worth pursuing instead of just throwing a bunch of money at the problem. For example, he raises the question, he believes that in order for China to become carbon neutral by 2050 and maintain its carbon neutrality through 2100, it will cost China $1 trillion a year. China's not spending $1 trillion a year. China, in fact, has increased its carbon emissions 300% by 1990. He raises the question, it's a fair question, what happens if China doesn't cooperate? What's the impact on world carbon neutrality? If it doesn't cooperate, is America wasting all its money? He raises the question about Russia. He thinks that Russia needs to start spending today $400 to $500 billion a year and spend that amount every year between now and 2100 to achieve carbon neutrality. It's about 3 times what Russia spends on its military. Does anyone in this room honestly believe that President Putin tomorrow is going to stand up and say, well, I'm going to stop spending money on my military and start spending it on CO2 emissions? And Professor Lumberg raises the question of, well, what happens if they don't? What happens if India doesn't cooperate? Developing countries, they want the same things as us. They want to be able to eat and live indoors, and their children to have better lives. Are we going to have to pay developing countries for their energy transition, particularly when it's cheaper for them to advance their societies using fossil fuels? These are the kind of questions that need to be hit head on, and we're not doing it. And this administration, with all due respect, has not done it. All we're doing is throwing money at a problem. And I asked, I think it was your deputy secretary, Madam Secretary, about a year or so ago, I said, if the United States government achieves carbon neutrality by 2050, and we spend the money to do it, how much will that lower world temperatures? Or how much will that decrease the increase in world temperatures? He said, I can't guarantee you that it'll lower temperatures at all, because it depends on other countries. And I think that needs to be addressed head on, and I think you're the person to do it. I don't know if the White House will let you, but the world is yearning for this. I'm going on too long. I'm sorry, Madam Chair, but people are starting to figure out that they're going to have to pay for this. We see it in Germany right now. I mean, Germany said, well, we're just going to require everybody to convert to heat pumps. Now, all of a sudden, people say, well, you mean I've got to go buy a $15,000 heat pump? And so they're pushing back. And in order to have people buy into an energy transition, they've got to understand that there's an overarching plan. I'm sorry for going on so long, Madam Chair.
Under your leadership, the Department of Energy has targeted gas stoves, washing machines, refrigerators, and clothes dryers based on what was called unquantified benefits related to climate and public health. How do you balance the meager, unquantified benefits of these rules with the massive cost burdens imposed on American manufacturers and consumers?
First of all, they are quantified. Americans will save $2 trillion in energy savings because their appliances are more efficient. We're required to do that under...
Yes, ma'am, but the poor folks have to, when they do this, they have to buy these things. I think we're taking that, and I know the corporations love it when y'all put these new rules and regulations in, ma'am, but I really wished we had a little more time, and I wish you would show up when we ask you to. I think that shows a lot of arrogance, and Tennesseans are reminded of this leadership every time they go to the pump. And you all should be ashamed, I think, for your lack of accountability to Congress by not showing up when you're asked. I mean, we had to threaten you with a subpoena just to get y'all here. So I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes Ms. Brown from Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Granholm, it is great to see you again. I'm glad we had a chance to hear about...
Fuel, is that correct?
Net zero suggests that it is also using some hydrocarbon-based fuel, but it has been decarbonized.
Can you name the benefits of fossil fuel in and of itself?
Can I name...
As an energy source?
Well, it is dense, and it keeps the lights on, keeps transportation going. It's an important part of our energy mix.
It's cheap, it's reliable, it's abundant, it's predictable, it's distributable, right?
It's all of that, and it needs to be cleaned.
And so when you have benefits to the overall benefits, when you talk about net zero and when our climate friends, they don't really include the personal benefits or the economic benefits. Can you name some economic benefits that come from fossil fuels?
Well, clearly our economy has been built upon fossil fuels. Our economy is driven by fossil fuels. But fossil fuels have also created an enormous problem, which is climate change. And that's impacting individuals and economies too. So let's clean it up.
Let's talk about some other things. With fossil fuels, you saw a dramatic increase over the last 130 years of longevity and mortality rates. Is that correct? That's
yes.
true, right?
Yes.
You also saw a dramatic increase in sanitation and health impacts that were good, right?
Well, I wouldn't know that I would attribute that directly to fossil fuels, but yes, we have seen an increase
certainly
in longevity, increase in health.
So most, with the number of petroleum-based products that you have out there, it affects virtually every aspect of your life, whether what you're wearing, your health the apparatuses that you use, all of those come from petroleum-based products, right?
Petroleum-based products impact every aspect of our economy.
So PJM Interconnection, the nation's largest grid operator, released a report finding that the amount of generation retirement appears to be more certain than the timely arrival of replacement generation resources. What they're really getting at there is that we're reducing reliable energy resources before reliable sources come online. And that's really what we see happening, and that's the anticipation. That's why some states talk about rolling brownouts that are coming their way. They're very concerned about that, as am I. Let's talk for just a second about electric vehicles, if we can. So the funding came in the IRA and the federal budget estimated. Let me get this right here. In the 117th Congress, we passed the IRA. My Democrats colleagues did anyway, and they provided. CBO and JCT estimated that the eliminate spending and tax breaks would cost around $400 billion by moving to electric vehicles, commercial electric vehicles, heavy-duty electric vehicles, tax credit for residential charging equipment, and $3 billion for postal fleet electrification. That was, they estimated that would have a net of $400 billion cost. Since that bill has passed, now for those same programs, the estimate is that the subsidies will be $1.1 trillion over the same period of time. Now, of that, $7.5 billion was generated for nationwide electric vehicle charging infrastructure, and yet it's been reported that we have now 4 charging stations, I believe it is, and that was reported by NBC. Does that sound accurate to you?
No, it doesn't.
Well, tell me how many new charging facilities do we have? Oh, I'm sorry, 7? 7. There's been 7 built in 4 states.
So let me just explain this. The National Electric Vehicle Initiative required states to develop a plan in order to be eligible for that $7.5 billion. All states did. We approved all of those plans. All of the funding has been released to the states. These are all state programs. So now 36 states have released solicitations to be able to build out those charging stations. 22 states have announced awards. There will be an additional 2,000 stations built by the end of 2024.
You're guaranteeing that there's going to be 2,000 EV stations?
That is what we forecast.
And that's your forecast. And the result is you're putting those in, the taxpayers are putting those in. All of these are taxpayer subsidized, and yet Ford can't even sell their cars. Most of these lots can't sell them. I would like to introduce into the record the article where Ford is announcing massive losses of $1.3 billion that they're losing on an average $132,000 for every EV that they sell.
Without objection to order.
Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes Mr. Lynch from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Madam Secretary. Good to see you. Thank you for all your good work. Just really quick on light heat.
I recognize this Ranking Member Raskin from Maryland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Granholm, welcome to the Oversight Committee.
Thank you.
And thank you for your great hard work on behalf of the American people. And let me start with something that I mentioned before, which is we actually have record high production of gas and oil right now. Isn't that right?
Correct.
Will you explain how that's measured and how that's monitored?
Well, we are, the oil and gas industry, we are record exporters of liquefied natural gas. None of that has been stopped. We are the world's largest exporter of liquefied natural gas. We are the world's largest producer of oil, crude oil as well.
Yeah. So you're undertaking this public interest process that the very distinguished gentleman from Louisiana just invoked. You are in the middle of that process. And so you have paused in the LNG export permit process. What effect will that actually have on LNG exports in the near and foreseeable future?
Yeah, thank you for the question, because it has absolutely no impact on any exports that are happening now. We have authorized 48 billion cubic feet of export of liquefied natural gas, 48 billion. That is 3 times what we are currently exporting. We are the largest exporter at 14 billion cubic feet. And in addition to that, we have authorized another 22 that are under construction, 22 billion that are currently under construction. The bottom line is so much has happened in terms of exports of liquefied natural gas since the last assessment was done. We have exploded in our authorizations. So this pause only applies to new ones coming down the pike. Everybody who's exporting now, everybody who's under construction, everybody who is authorized, who doesn't have a final investment decision, all can proceed. We are the biggest exporter. We will continue to be exporting, and it will not affect the jobs. It will not affect what is happening already in terms of exports.
Well, our colleague invites us to imagine that there's some kind of categorical ban on exports of liquefied natural gas and that there's some sort of cutoff taking place. Is there a cutoff?
There is no cutoff. There is no cutoff. We have to do an assessment of what's in the public interest, given the huge amounts that we have authorized.
But that assessment's going forward. It's
The
not
assessment
about
is
any
going
of the
forward.
projects that are currently taking place now, right?
Correct. That's correct.
Okay. So we want to try to restore some sense of proportion and reality to the conversation. I know there's this effort to define your policies bizarrely as a war on energy. Can you just respond to that convoluted rhetorical claim?
Well, I think that the United States right now would be considered energy dominant. We are #1 in oil and gas. We are #1 in exports. And we are aggressively seeking to be larger in our deployment of renewable energy as well, which is what Congress has given us the authority to do. So we are an energy country, and we will remain an energy exporting country, even as we continue to deploy renewable energy for use at home.
Okay, the ex-president just went before a whole bunch of oil and gas executives and essentially demanded that they give his campaign $1 billion because he was going to release a rash of regulations reversing climate progress and reversing the policies of your administration. He promised to auction off more leases for oil drilling in the Gulf of Mexico and has been repeatedly chanting at rallies, "Drill, baby, drill." What would happen to our climate goals if we actually undertook to reverse all of the progress made under the Biden-Harris administration?
Well, obviously, we want to get to net zero by 2050 as a nation, but also in conjunction with all other nations on the planet who are seeking to address climate change, for the reasons that you stated in your opening statement in terms of the number of extreme weather events, which cost us so much more than addressing climate change costs us.
Yeah.
In the end, we have a responsibility to our citizens.
As Secretary of Energy, do you think climate denialism is dangerous to the future of our country?
Of course it is. It's dangerous to us as humans. It's dangerous to our economy as well. The opportunity in clean energy is enormous across the country. So,
and I remember there was a time when the Secretary of Energy would appear to be at odds with the Secretary of the EPA and the people working on environment. But tell us about the inside of the administration. You have these record levels of gas and oil production and other renewable energies moving forward. But do you see your job as opposed to the job of the people who are working to preserve our climate?
not at all. We work in conjunction with the Department of Interior, the EPA. We work together, and we want to make sure that we're producing energy enough to keep the lights on and to keep people moving, but we do it in the cleanest way possible, and we can do both.
Well, thank you for your hard work. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes Mr. Sessions from Texas.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Secretary, welcome. We're delighted that you're here. We've had a series of days.
Burchett asked you about some UAP stuff. You said that the DoD essentially had denied any existence of that, and you referred to them as drones, correct?
It's my understanding that the Department of Defense has looked at this and issued a report about it.
I have a lot of questions, so just quick and concise if possible. There have been persistent claims and reports, including those from credible whistleblowers to this committee, suggesting that the U.S. government, potentially including the Department of Energy, has been involved in reverse engineering technologies recovered from UAP. For example, the Pentagon's proposed Kona Blue program aimed at reverse engineering such technologies, although it was ultimately not established. Can you clarify whether the Department of Energy has been involved in any such efforts, or, either historically or currently, to analyze reverse engineering materials from related to UAPs?
I have no knowledge of that.
Okay, there are several reports indicated frequent drone incursions over DOE nuclear facilities, including an incident on April 1st, 2021 at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, also known as LLNL. Can you detail the DOE's current security measures to prevent unauthorized drone activities or UAPs, and what steps are being taken to enhance these measures of frequencies of incidences?
Yeah, we have a whole counter drone effort to make sure that all of our national security sites and our labs are protected from incursions from drones, I'll just say, that are not authorized. So there's a whole series of protocols, probably not ripe for discussion in this public setting.
Correct. So I reviewed some unclassified materials from around the 40s and 50s, and so they weren't just being reported as drones back then, and I encourage you to look over those materials because I think that you guys should be upgrading that program to cover down on UAPs. There have been documented sightings of metallic spheres over DOE facilities, if you want to call them drones in this instance, such as one report on April 30th, 2019 over LLNL. What investigations have been conducted in regards to these sightings, and what conclusions do you guys have about the nature and origins of these objects?
I'm happy to follow up with you on that.
Okay, we'll be submitting also too for public record some questions after this, if you could please answer those. Considering the DOE's involvement in nuclear and sensitive research facilities, how does the DOE coordinate with agencies like the Department of Defense and AARO to investigate UAP sightings?
We obviously are teamed with the Department of Defense because of our national security and nuclear mission.
Are you able to cite any specific investigations or shared data analysis efforts?
I don't have information on that.
Okay. As of right now, again, we'll be submitting some questions for you after this, but I hope that you guys can answer those in a timely fashion. And again, for those that might be tuning into this, I would encourage you to look at some of those unclassified materials, and we'll be happy to provide your office with that. I'll just follow up by one other question, I guess, to close it out. Does the DOE currently work with JSOC in order to handle security measures?
We work with all of the security entities around the federal government. We're part of an overall all-of-government effort on both cyber as well as national security.
Do you guys work with JSOC? Yes or no?
Yes, we do.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, ma'am. I yield the rest of my time, Chairman.
Would the gentlelady yield your remaining time?